I call the channel the Jungle Nook, and today I want to go over some winter care tips for our indoor houseplants. I'm going to discuss photosynthesis and what we can do to ensure that our plants are maximizing the amount of available light to engage in photosynthesis efficiently and effectively. But I'm also going to talk about humidity, temperature, watering, fertilization, and even winter uppotting. When you're looking up winter plant care, there's some misconceptions. And I also believe that, because I know this was true for me for many years, I'm misinterpreting the information that I was receiving and actually causing some harm to my plants, thinking I was doing what was recommended when really I just misinterpreted the information or misunderstood it a little bit. Let's start with photosynthesis. I believe most of us are probably aware that photosynthesis is when the plant is taking nutrients and sunlight and converting sunlight and those nutrients into other compounds like fats, amino acids, proteins, things like that, sugars and starches, which is true. But I don't think a lot of people are necessarily aware, like myself for a long time, that just because a plant is in light does not necessarily mean it's engaging in photosynthesis or that it's engaging in photosynthesis efficiently, taking full advantage of the potential of the available light. And the reason for that, a plant being in light and not being able to engage in photosynthesis to its maximum ability, could be a lack of water, could also be a lack of nutrients. When talking about your tropical variety, and you'll look up that it's recommended that you let the soil dry out in between waterings, which is great advice for a lot of different reasons. However, when talking about tropical varieties, they are in a climate that is completely different to things like cacti or succulents. Those types of plants, cacti and succulents, you let that soil become bone dry in between waterings. But a tropical variety that comes from a tropical rainforest where it rains every single day for all 4 seasons, when they say allow the soil to dry out in between waterings, what's actually meant is think of a sponge. Submerge a sponge into the water, take it out, wring it out the best you can until no more water comes out of the sponge. The sponge is still moist, but you can't get no more water out of it. With our tropical varieties, that is what is referred to as dry soil in between waterings. There's enough moisture within that soil to protect the roots from drying out, but there's not an adequate amount of moisture for the roots to be able to absorb that moisture out of the soil. And it's water that absorbs the nutrients. If you allow your tropical varieties to go bone dry in between waterings, you can damage the roots, which will take additional water and nutrients to repair. But also, while that soil is bone dry and the plant's not able to absorb the water and nutrients, it's not able to engage in photosynthesis. Yes, the plant will have reserves that it will hold on to, but if that soil's bone dry and it's in the light and it stays like that, it's not going to be using the water and nutrients to engage in photosynthesis. It's going to be using them for other functions. I know when you're looking up watering in the winter, it says to reduce the amount of watering because the plant's going to be growing slower. Also, you'll see that it says to reduce or completely stop fertilizing in the winter because the plant's growing slower and doesn't require it. Let's talk about that real briefly. Tropical plants do not go dormant in the winter, but they do have the potential to go semi-dormant. They will experience semi-dormancy due to the conditions that they're in. One being, for some reason, even though it's in a tropical environment, it hasn't rained. They're experiencing a drought-like condition. Then they'll go into semi-dormancy. If you reduce the amount of watering in the winter and they're not getting an accurate amount, then yeah, they'll go into semi-dormancy. But it's not because of the season. It's because you've created a drought-like condition within the soil. Or perhaps it's not a drought-like condition, but you're not fertilizing, so it doesn't have the nutrients to engage in photosynthesis. Our tropical varieties do not go dormant, and semi-dormancy is a defense mechanism that we want to try and prevent. I know that when talking about our houseplants or potted plants in general, root rot is a concern. Root rot is caused by the soil being overly saturated. And oversaturation of the soil is not caused by overwatering. It's actually caused by having soil that does not drain properly or efficiently. Adding things like perlite or orchid bark, those are great so that your soil is fast draining, and it also will provide air pockets within the soil. Root rot is caused by pathogens or harmful funguses that thrive in overly saturated soil. And overly saturated soil has a lower oxygen content within it because all the little air pockets are filled with water. So pathogens thrive in saturated soil that has a low amount of oxygen within it. Oxygen's really important, which is why it's good to let your soil dry out in between waterings. When I was talking about the sponge and how you wring the sponge out and you can't get no more water out, but it's still moist, there's plenty of oxygen and the soil's dry enough to prevent pathogens within your soil and prevent root rot. You need your soil to be able to drain excess water out of it, and that water has to be able to drain out of the pot itself. The pot has to be able to drain so the water can leave. With the proper potting mix, with the proper drainage, it should be extremely difficult to overwater your plants. I water my plants here, my tropical varieties, almost every single day. And I don't experience root rot, but I put a lot of perlite and stuff into my soil. As far as nutrients is concerned, they require the plants in a pot, regardless if it's inside or outside, require a all-purpose fertilizer, but you do not want to use a balanced fertilizer. A balanced fertilizer would be the first three numbers on the product, the first three nutrients, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, at equal amounts. At equal amounts, that's a balanced fertilizer. However, plants do not require those first three primary nutrients in balanced amounts. A plant requires whatever that second number is, the phosphorus, it requires 3 times as much nitrogen. The nitrogen is what produces the chlorophyll to convert the sunlight into energy. And then that energy with nutrients are converted into other compounds the plant needs that it cannot absorb out of the soil. And the potassium, that last number, that just needs to be somewhere in between the first two. And there's not a real science to it. That second number, if it's a 5, you'd want your nitrogen to be somewhere around 15. It could be 12, it could be 18. It doesn't have to be exact. But you do want around or as close to 3 times as much nitrogen as you have phosphorus. And that second number, again, just somewhere roughly in between those first two. And by providing your plant with an all-purpose fertilizer, meaning it has all of the nutrients that a plant requires, and an interesting fact, nearly all plants require the exact same types of nutrients and use those nutrients in exactly the same way. A plant has a lot of different functions that it engages in besides photosynthesis. Every function requires a whole host of different nutrients and in different amounts. An all-purpose fertilizer with a 3-to-1 ratio, meaning 3 times as much nitrogen as phosphorus, and that last number, the potassium, somewhere in the middle, your plant's going to have everything it needs. You do not have to give your plants the nutrients it needs when it needs it, because the plant is going to absorb and store and hold on to excess nutrients and use them as it needs it. So again, an all-purpose fertilizer with a 3-to-1 ratio is really highly recommended for your indoor plants, especially in the winter. I do not reduce my fertilizing in the winter. And for me, in my situation where I live in the United States, in New York State, which is pretty far north, and we get extremely cold winters and very low humidity. Plus, where I live, we have to heat our homes in the winter, and that's actually reducing the amount of moisture or the humidity level within my home. Outside, the humidity level is plummeted. What little I have in the house, my furnace is also, reducing it even further. So I have a lot of evaporation occurring within my pots. So I actually do water a little more frequently in the winter. If I don't water my plants, let's say I leave for the weekend and I don't water my plants, I'll water them before I leave. I come home, they haven't been watered in 2 or 3 days. The overall amount of humidity within this room will drop. I'll water everything really good, look at the humidity level an hour or so later, and it's already starting to go back up. As far as humidity is concerned, it's more important to have your humidity levels stay constant. You want a steady humidity level. You don't want fluctuations. Fluctuations is worse than low humidity. This room right here in the summer will stay at about 55, maybe even get up to 65% humidity sometimes in the warmer seasons. But in the winter, I struggle to keep my humidity in the high 40s to low 50s. And my plants are just fine. Now, I do have a few varieties that will struggle a little bit, especially things like my ferns. Plants that have a thicker leaf are a little more resilient to lower humidity. And my ferns have a really thin leaf, so they're a little more susceptible. I'll lose some leaves off of them in the winter, and they bounce back in the spring and summer. But a constant humidity level is really important. If you're using humidifiers to keep your humidity level up, make sure you keep on top of topping them off. You don't want them to run out and then not fill them for a day or two, because that will cause fluctuations. Fluctuations is worse than low humidity. Most tropical plants will do just fine between 50 and 60% humidity. And that is more towards the low end, but still within acceptable specifications. That's really good. And 50 to 60, 65% humidity is what's good for us too. That's the proper amount of humidity for our lungs. It's good for us. It's also good for your home. If your humidity is too low in your home, wood surfaces can dry out. And if it's too high, that can promote molds and mildews, which can be harmful. And temperature. Yeah, Tropical plants, I think a lot of us might think tropical plants want to be in extremely humid, hot weather. It's not true. It's not accurate. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, at 85 degrees, tropical plants start to grow slower. It's too warm. They get stressed out. A tropical plant, most of our plants actually, will grow and be actively growing between ideally 72 all the way up to 85 degrees. Anything above that, they start to slow down. Anything lower than that, they start to slow down. And yes, when a plant is growing slower, they will use less nutrients and less water. But in our home, light is really usually the limiting factor, and you want to maximize the plant's ability to engage in photosynthesis. So continue to fertilize, keep that soil hydrated. There is no such thing as a schedule for watering plants. Cacti, some of your succulents, even a few orchids and stuff, they do need the soil to become bone dry in between waterings. But our tropical varieties, I've already said a few times, that whole sponge thing, when you wring a sponge out and it's still moist, that's the dry soil. That's when you want to add more water. That's what dictates and determines when to water your plant. There's really no schedule. And temperature-wise, I let my plants get down all the way to about 70 degrees. I try to keep them in the winter where I'm living a cold climate in the winter. I try to keep my temperature above 68, and it would be nice to keep it right around 74. The plants would grow really well at those temperatures. Back to the photosynthesis though, there are some things we can do besides adding grow lights to help our plants be able to utilize the available light. The thing about light is light scatters, or it reflects or bounces off all surfaces. So when the sun's out and going through our windows, yeah, right in front of the windows, nice and bright, but the whole room is, the intensity of the light in the whole room is going up. Now, as far as a window is concerned, it is a really good idea to wash the inside and outside of your windows so more light can pass through. And also removing the screens is a good idea too. Even a clean window, when light passes through, when sunlight passes through a clean window, its intensity is still being reduced by having to pass through the glass. But cleaning your glass can help to get more light in. Now, you can also move your plants as long as the window doesn't have a draft. You can move your plants closer to the windows so that they're closer to the window and the light's a little more intense, the closer you get to a window. But besides that, you can also clean your leaves themselves. You can use distilled water and just wipe your leaves off, removing the dust. You might be surprised sometimes how much dust is actually on your leaves. So cleaning the window and wiping off the leaf itself is a real good plant care chore to do to increase or help the plant to maximize the available light. Also, as you're wiping it off, you could be removing any pests that you're not aware of that are on there. So that, there's an added benefit as well. One thing that I would recommend though, if you're moving your plants in the winter closer to a window, that's good to do. But at the same time, when you do that, leave that plant there for the entire season. You don't really want to be moving your plants around too much, because they do develop and grow to not only position themselves to catch the angle of the light, but the cell structure within the leaves will also develop due to the intensity of the light where they're at. So when you move a plant, you may notice, it might drop a few leaves, especially in the winter. Just don't move them around too much. Winter uppotting. is something that's also not recommended to do. Well, there's a really good reason why winter uppotting is not a good time to uppot. And that would be because you have reduced the amount of water, you're not fertilizing, and the plant is now no longer growing and going through maybe semi-dormancy. It's got nutrient deficiencies, it's dehydrated. So now it is also more susceptible to pests and disease because of that dehydration and lack of nutrients. And when I'm saying lack of nutrients, it's not no longer engaging in photosynthesis, so it's not got the sugars and starches and all the other compounds that it needs. So the plant becomes unhealthy and susceptible, to disease and pests, all sorts of stuff. And now you're uppotting it into a larger pot, and you could be damaging the roots or shocking the plant when you do this. And also, when you put a plant into a larger pot, it actually senses that there's more room and fresh soil, and it will actively start to grow its roots out, which is going to take nutrients and water to develop this root system. And if you're uppotting it in the winter and then you're not going to give it the water and the nutrients that it requires, that's the reason for a lot of failure in the winter due to winter uppotting. This is kind of interesting to me. For me, winter is when I actually do the most with my indoor plants. But yet, we're told in the winter, stop watering and fertilizing. We're basically being told, just leave the plant alone, when winter is actually within our home a growing season. My plants, during the summer, a lot of them get moved outside. Even those that don't, they got all that extra light and they're actively growing. And then, in fall, late fall, early winter gets here, there's a lot less sun, but the plant has built up all kinds of nutrients. They already are in a growth spurt. I have leaves that have not fully opened or hardened off yet. And it's the growing season in our home. Just because where I live, we might have snow and it's only 25 degrees Fahrenheit outside, those aren't the conditions within my home. Winter is a growing season for our indoor plants. And it is a great time to engage in winter gardening within our homes. All of these little tips that I'm giving in this video are all great at helping your plant to maintain the existing foliage it already has and not lose too much of it over the winter, so that when spring comes, it has the maximum amount of leaves already on it to start utilizing all that extra light and get a really good growth spurt. Also, the advice that I'm giving is great for helping the plant to finish developing new leaves and even producing new leaves over the winter. By not reducing the water, the nutrients, and trying to, help it to maximize the available light by cleaning your windows and the leaves. You're maximizing its ability to continue to put out new growth, but also, really important, maintaining the growth it already has and has put so much energy into. This is probably my third year now making these winter plant care videos. If you guys have watched my old videos and seen me stuff, or I said stuff that you weren't really used to hearing, and you tried out some of the things, like for watering, for instance, I have said many times that if you have a schedule that you're watering your plants on, continue to water it exactly like you were, same frequency, same amount, but in between your waterings, just give it a little bit, just a little splash, maybe only 20% of what you normally give it on your watering day. But in between your watering days, just give it like an extra 20% and see what happens. Or maybe you were somebody who reduced or completely stopped fertilizing in the winter, and now you're fertilizing a little bit more. Let me know in the comments so everybody else can see too what the results were with that little extra water or some fertilizer in the winter. Or any other advice that I've given. You know, put that in the comments. I'd really like to hear your experiences, your thoughts. Even if it didn't work, put that in there too. I let all the comments go through. You know, I'm not, what is that called, a gatekeeper? I don't do that. Everything that I do, I share. I don't have any secret thing I do that gets me the results that I get, and I don't share that. There'd be no reason for me to do that. And everything that I recommend doing, I really do.